Well, hey guys, here we are with another Tomes of Terror book review. So, Ben Young. This is a writer I had not read any of his stuff before. I hadn't heard of him previously. He's based out of Cincinnati, Ohio, as far as I could determine. And the book of his that I chose from my Kindle Unlimited suggestions, which is how I usually pick these, was called Home. And this one was published in March of 2024, and I think it's his second book. His first one was called Stuck and came out in September of 2023. Now, although, as usual, this was a completely random pick, this was, happily, another really solid read. Kind of gave me some Stephen King Needful Things kind of vibe to it, but it also had kind of its own thing going on, too. I mean, I didn't have any issues with it at all, really. It was very well written, very well paced, had pretty complex characters that you were actually rooting for, at least most of them, and a really intriguing, kind of creepy, and fairly original premise that just kind of kept me turning pages all the way to the end. Now, as I usually say in these reviews, whether books or movies, I'm not going to spoil the ending or any big plot twists, but I will be talking about the plot in some detail. So if you would rather know nothing at all about the story going in, then please read the book first and then come back here to discuss it. So at the beginning of the book, Home, there's a little bit of like a prologue type situation written in the second person, where we're following a man whose name we later learn is Toby Finnegan, although I don't think this is mentioned at first. He's giving a sort of spooky history or like a ghost tour type of thing around this town called Oak Hollow. Now, he's pretty adamant that he doesn't want to hype up any of the supernatural stories that have kind of sprung up about this town and about one haunted house in particular. He's kind of one of those ones where he likes to just stick to the facts, you know what I mean? Because he thinks that the facts as they are like creepy enough on their own and you don't need to embellish them or make stuff up. Now, this character actually disappears for a long time after this introduction, but he will kind of play into the story briefly, like a little bit later on. Now, after that, we start to follow a handful of characters who will kind of be important to the unfolding events. Now, each chapter switches back and forth from one character to another. I saw a couple reviewers that they didn't really dislike it, but they were kind of bothered by it or confused by it or whatever. But it honestly didn't really bother me at all. A lot of novels do that, so I don't really see what the issue is. There aren't really that many major characters to follow along with. And I thought it was good to get like new perspectives on what was happening like as each new chapter came along. So the long and short of it, the background. Oak Hollow is a dying town. Like, the main company where most of the locals had worked shut down, like, a long time ago. And so the area is now, like, very severely economically depressed. Now, a lot of the families that live there, like, have lived there for generations. And they really love the place and are kind of reluctant to leave it. But, honestly, the town is kind of circling the drain. And at some point, I mean, if they're still of working age, they're not really going to have much choice. Like, if they still want to have a job and like have money to live and stuff like that, they probably will eventually have to leave because there's just like nothing to do around here. Now, one of the people who adores this place and grew up here and everything is this guy named Sean. And he basically wanted to live here forever. Like, he really loves this town. Now, he's married to a woman named Catherine who's from out of town, and they have 3 kids. Now, at the beginning of the story, Sean has lost his job, as a lot of other residents had, and he's kind of beginning to lose hope of finding another one. But he still doesn't really want to leave, like I said, because he loves this place. So this huge argument with his wife kind of happens after she tells him that she's actually gotten a really well-paying position, like in another state. I think it was in Indiana or something like that. And that maybe they'll need to move or like work something else out. She doesn't really have any attachment to Oak Hollow the way her husband does, so she's just trying to do what's best for the family, you know what I mean? Like, trying to help them get back on their feet. Now, while Catherine and the kids are out, like, she goes to pick them up from school or whatever, Sean kind of has, like, a dark night of the soul kind of moment. And so he's starting to make preparations to hang himself in the basement of their house. Thinking that his wife and kids will be better off without them. Like, he's like, I'm the one that's keeping us here, and, they'll be better when they're free and they can move away, you know what I mean? Just before he does it, though, he kind of has a change of heart, And then he's like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, we'll work this out or whatever. This is ridiculous. However, it seems like some unexplained force then kind of like overcomes his will and sort of compels him to go ahead and go through with it, despite him no longer wanting to. So he hangs himself, whether he wants to or not. So Catherine actually comes home and finds him dangling from like a ceiling beam, when she gets there, much to her absolute horror, obviously. Now, while all of that is going on, we're also introduced to like an older guy named Walt, who lives alone with his adopted Great Dane, whose name is Cowboy. And don't worry, the dog is fine. Nothing bad happens to the dog. He's like kind of something of an introvert, almost like a hermit, but not quite that bad. Like he does still go to the hardware store and shit like that, but he really doesn't like interacting with people, which, like I said, I get it. He was actually really, really close to his dad, but his dad passed away several months before the events of the book, and he's still having a really hard time, like, dealing with the grief, like I said, because they were so close. He also has kind of a very pronounced, like, love-hate relationship with this town, with Ocalo, and he can't imagine leaving it, although, it must be said that he's in a lot better position than Sean was because he's retired and his house is paid for, so he doesn't have quite the same economic concerns, So one of Walt's busybody neighbors is Sean's cousin. And when he goes out to get the mail or whatever one day, she tells Walt, kind of weirdly, casually, that, oh, by the way, Sean committed suicide. So Walt is actually shocked by this, as you would be. Sean was actually his friend, and he had absolutely no inkling that things had gotten this bad for him, you know what I mean? Then the woman tells him, oh, maybe Ocalo's future is kind of looking up because a new business just opened in that supposedly haunted abandoned house over on Asher Street that's been sitting empty for like 12 years. So Walt is like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what kind of business is it? And then she tells him, oh, it's a funeral home. So to Walt, this doesn't really seem much like the economic harbinger of hope that she's making it seem, but he's like, okay, lady, whatever. So we kind of learn more about this funeral home when we start to follow Sean's widow, Catherine. Now, shortly after she finds her husband's body, she gets a phone call from the proprietor of said funeral home, who is a seemingly kind old man named Lloyd Nemec. Now, he offers to take care of everything for her free of charge. He's like, seriously, don't worry about a thing. Like, I'll come and get the body. You just go, like, to your mom's house or whatever, and I'll just take care of everything, and you don't even have to pay anything. Don't even worry about it. Like, she asked him about this, and he says, well, I'm independently wealthy. I just want to give something back to the community, even though he's really only just moved there, like, a month or two before. So Catherine, she's still obviously in complete shock about her husband's death. She goes along with his offer. She's relieved not to have to deal with stuff at this, very vulnerable time in her life. Now, her spidey senses are kind of telling her that something might be ever so slightly off, but she kind of tamps them down a little bit just because she's so freaked out, Now, the weird thing about the funeral home, well, I mean, one of the weird things, as you find out as the story goes on, is that on the outside, the house still looks like the abandoned shithole that it did before. But on the inside, it's been entirely renovated, like it's a super elegant, like modern funeral parlor, like you would expect. Now, Walt, in particular, when he goes to Sean's funeral, starts to wonder why this Lloyd Nemec person opened the place if only the inside had been renovated. Like, why didn't he do the outside? Because it seems like kind of unprofessional. And he was like, how was he able to open this business so quickly? Because, he's like, I don't know a huge amount about the funeral home industry, but there's a lot of regulation, and a lot of red tape that you have to go through to open one of these. You can't just it's not like a pop-up, you know what I mean? You can't just open it whenever you want to. So he's kind of wondering about that, and he thinks it's kind of weird. But because Walt has kind of an aversion to people, as I said, he seems to kind of mostly not want to get involved. Although he does kind of tell himself, I should really look after Catherine and the kids because Sean was his friend and he feels bad. But like I said, you can tell he's like really reluctant to get involved in anybody's because he's like, ooh, people, you know what I mean? So there are two other kind of big characters who have several chapters written from their perspective. Now, one of these is Myrtle, and she's like a mentally ill woman. Like, I think she's in her 80s. And she lives in this like super hoarded up house, like seriously little trails with shit piled everywhere too. No electricity, no running water, all that kind of stuff. So she lives in there by herself with only her doll collection to keep her company. Now she has actually become obsessed with the daughter of a neighbor of hers. She believes that this daughter is her own long-lost daughter, Rosita. And over the course of the story, she also comes to believe that the girl's mom is like a literal demon who has to be destroyed. And then there's Preston. Now he's this young guy who also has some severe issues, let's call it that, in the sense that he's very, very obviously a psychopath. Although I don't think he's killed anyone, at least yet, he has had these violent urges like his entire life. And as he gets older, he's becoming like afraid that he's not going to be able to hold them off anymore. Like he has various ways that he's developed of trying to stave off this inner shadow, that's what he calls it. He kind of like goes and works out at the gym. One of the main things he does though, this is kind of gross, but he breaks into people's houses to collect their hair out of the shower drain. Like he's really, really into people's hair. And he collects it, like he has shoeboxes full of like people's hair that he's pulled out of their drains. And like every now and then when he has these violent urges, he'll go into his collection and he'll like put the hair in his mouth and like chew on it and like rub it on his balls and stuff like that. It's pretty nasty. But you just know that, I mean, it's only going to be a matter of time before these urges that he has are going to drive him to murder. And indeed, when he kind of hooks up with Lloyd Nemec, the guy at the funeral home, that is kind of all set into motion also. So yeah, as the story kind of unfolds, it starts to become very clear that something very, very bizarre is going on at Nemec's funeral home, and that Lloyd Nemec himself is not what he appears to be. So all of the characters start to like intertwine in sort of interesting ways as the truth about Nemec and his plans for this town like are kind of slowly revealed. So yeah, as I mentioned, this was actually a great ride. I think Walt in particular was like a really great sympathetic character. And you follow a lot of the story through his POV, even though it does switch around like to other characters, like I said. And I think he was like my favorite character, though. He was easily the most sympathetic. And I think too that like the lore surrounding Lloyd Nemec and the weird funeral parlor is really cool and like really unique. And it's not gone into like in a massive amount of detail, but I think that was probably better. Like there's enough there to get the gist of kind of what Nemec is and what his goal for the town is. So I think it was just enough detail to like give you that without like over explaining it, you know what I mean? There's also quite a lot of gore in this and a pretty high body count, like if that's your thing. So, so it has like a lot of those kind of horror elements to it too. So yeah, this was, even though I picked it at random, this was another damn good read. I definitely recommend this if you're into Stephen King. Like I said, this is slightly kind of reminded me of Needful Things, but it's not exactly the same, so don't go too crazy with that. But it's just like, that was the first thing that came to mind. Also give me slight Ray Bradbury vibes too. Or, I mean, anything that's like a horror stories about, maybe even like Robert McCammon or something like that, with any kind of story about like a small town being inundated by like kind of like an ancient supernatural force. Like if you like that kind of stuff, then you probably really dig this. So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please remember, like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And I'll see you again on the next one. Bye.